Welcome to TranDescendant. I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
Well, we got a special day coming up, and we decided this time we're going to make that special and timely. So if you're listening to this on Monday, your timing is just right.
This Wednesday is the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. This is a worldwide celebration of sexual and gender diversities. Now, this was actually not a day that I was familiar with before we started talking about this. And in fact, it is celebrated right now I've got the website pulled up, and you yourself can also do this if you would like to follow along as you are listening. You can go to May17.org. So if you forget what day it's celebrated on, you just look up the website. It's May 17th. And it is celebrated in 130 countries, including 37 where same-sex acts are illegal. Thousands of initiatives, big and small, are reported throughout the planet.
Wow.
And it's a big deal. The date, May 17th, was specifically chosen to commemorate the World Health Organization's decision in 1990 to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder.
Uh-huh.
So this was a really, really big deal. If you remember, back in the 80s, we used to make fun of stuff all of the time.
You know it. You and I personally did.
Police Academy, I remember watching those movies, and the gag was always that they would lure the bad guys into a gay bar where presumably something bad was going to happen to the bad guy, and then everybody would laugh. And now that just feels really wrong. It feels really, like we were poking fun at the wrong people in a way that was really, really hurtful.
Well, I'll tell you, as I probably have mentioned on this podcast before, that I haven't had an alcoholic drink since October 6, 1979. But I can remember back that they would portray a drunk as funny. W.C. Fields and beyond. It was funny. Oh, look at the funny drunk. It's not funny anymore.
No, it sure is not. Because we recognize now we've come a long ways in some very positive directions to recognize that a lot of things really hurt people in ways that we can't ignore.
It creates a stereotype. These people are all alike. As you always say, if you've met one LGBTQ person, you've met one.
You asked a question earlier.
As we were preparing
for this. Well, how do we actually know that? So it was taken out of the DSM. I don't even know what DSM stands for, but it's the manual that all of the therapists use when they're diagnosing, do you have a mental disorder or mental illness? In 1990, they chose finally, at long last, after a lot of fight over this, to have that taken out. And you asked the question.
Right. How do we know what is a mental disorder?
How do we know? Back in those days, of course, people would say, well, it's held by the minority of people. It's a small group of people, and they're not acting like the majority, and therefore we're going to classify this as a mental illness. I did a web search to find out, how does the World Health Organization classify a mental disorder now? They say that it is characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior. So it's usually associated with distress or impairment in important areas of functioning. You and I both know a very, very successful doll maker who is a very prominent gay man that was probably the most visible person for us when you and I were working together.
Yes.
Been in a very strong long-term relationship, been a strong pillar in his community.
And is probably the most revered person in that field.
Yes. I felt very honored to be able to get to know him.
Me too. He just commanded so much respect.
So much. We could use lots and lots of people, but I use him because he's one of the first that you and I both knew together, and we developed a shared language about the fact that he sort of represented for us the LGBTQ community at a time where neither you nor I had much interaction.
Right.
It's very difficult to say in a situation like that he has some sort of cognition problem or emotional regulation problem or behavior problem. He is one of the most well-adjusted men that I know.
I think so too.
I would strive to be like him
Yes.
in so many different ways. And you could point towards dozens and hundreds and thousands and literally millions of people that are also like that and say, this is clearly not a mental disorder.
Well, I think another good example is Pete Buttigieg, the politician. He commands attention, ran for president of the United States, and he's just a very well-spoken and highly respected by people. But we could name many. We could go on and on.
The people that are the skeptics will oftentimes say, well, it was just all politics that it was taken out of there and nobody did tests and studies and things. And I would respond and say, no, it was put in there because of politics.
Yes.
It was taken out because it never should have been put in there to begin with. And when you look at it, you say, why would anyone consider this a mental disorder? And there are no good reasons to do so. If somebody like me, for instance, when I transitioned, I discovered I feel so much more happier with who I am. I feel so much more comfortable in my body. I feel so much more well-adjusted. It was hard for me to give up some things that depended on who I was beforehand and presenting how I did before. That part was very difficult. But the alignment between my presentation and how I feel on the inside is so much closer now. I feel so much better. That is not a mental illness. That is a way to be more truly authentic.
I completely agree with that. You know, the interesting thing is that is something that as you transition, I became more understanding of how that happened. That wasn't something that I could accept right away. We come out of we come out of black and all of a sudden we look at white. We say, but remember, black was more comfortable. We grew up with black. It's different. You see it in a different light, and it's something we all have to learn, I think.
We all have to do that in a lot of circumstances. And for those of us that have been harboring, well, even for those of us that have harbored secrets our whole life, we still live in that same culture, and we carry those same kinds of discrimination even towards ourselves. And I learned this very early on with another doll maker, that when I was first coming to terms with being transgender, I figured, well, the LGBTQ plus community must be one homogenous group and everybody gets along and everything is good and everybody just, sings songs all the day and just, waves rainbow flags around and everything is happy. And I discovered, I told somebody who was a close friend, but again, another gay man, I said, hey, I'm really struggling with this and I think I might be transgender. And he said, I don't know the first thing about that. I don't know. I don't have anybody in my life that's transgender. And he didn't have any kind of explicit bias, but he had a lot of implicit bias that as he got to know me, then he realized, a lot of those things that I thought were true about trans people weren't. And the same for me, the same for all of us. We all deal with those. So we can always learn ways to overcome that discrimination and the prejudices that we have towards one another. And that's really what May 17th is about.
So yes, May 17th, it is a time of celebration. I think we'd sing the song, but we don't have enough time.
Too bad. We'll have to cut that.
I guess so. So how do we do this?
Different communities will celebrate the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia different ways. And some people will abbreviate it as, I don't know exactly how this is pronounced, but IDAHOBIT. IDA for International Day Against. And then HO is presumably for homophobia. BI is presumably for biphobia, and T is presumably for transphobia. Though many of the celebrations will also add in their discrimination against intersex people, discrimination against other queer people, and a variety of other things. So different communities will celebrate it different ways. Now, this year's theme is called Together Always, Unity in Diversity, which is so strong because that's exactly what we're talking about, that we are diverse and we don't necessarily fully understand one another, and we want to maintain that diversity. We want to be cognizant of ways that the way that I am different is different from the way that somebody else might be different. And we're all different in different ways. And that's good. And I shouldn't expect you to be different in the same way that I am. And you shouldn't expect me to be different in the same way that you are. But yet, in the midst of all of it, we have unity in that we are standing together with one another. Together always, unity in diversity. And they put together several different illustrations. These were done by an artist from Chile, Sofia Miranda Vandenbosch. And these are amazing illustrations. You can use these. They specifically designed these so that you can go to May17.org and you can use these for your own social media. You can use them to draw attention to what's going on. And there's a lot of different resources here. So big shout out to her as that artist. We're really grateful to be able to use that. And you can see the first of 6 as the illustration that we used for this podcast today. This is a great day to decide that what can I do to increase my own education and my own understanding?
Educate yourself. And that is what we're really continuing to try to do with this podcast, is educate ourselves. And they say take time to learn about the issues facing the LGBTQ community and understand the significance of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. This will help you to become more effective in your support.
And one of the ways you can do that is by listening to a great podcast like this one here. But there are lots of others. And our podcast is a great education tool specifically if you are starting out at the very beginning. It's a great place to start. But there's so much more to learn.
It's also a great place to start if you're trying to mend relationships that have been broken because of coming out, or because you're finding somebody there that is unable to accept where you are. They don't have to necessarily agree with you on everything. If you're going to find somebody out there who absolutely agrees with you on everything, you're going to be a lonely person because you won't find that person. We all have disagreements with each other, but the key is to get along. And that's one of the real key parts of this podcast.
Unity in diversity is the very theme.
Yes.
That diversity means diversity of opinion as well. And while I would have very strong things to say to somebody that is not a supporter, but I would always do it in love and always do it in a way of saying, look, you know what is most important to me, especially if you are a family member or a loved one or a friend, is I want to make sure that we maintain that connection and the mutual respect for one another.
I've heard it said, and I've used it many times, learn to disagree without being disagreeable. And that's the truth. That makes a big difference. There's no point in elevating the conversation. Disagree without being disagreeable.
So point number 2, what is the next point on their list of things that we can do to be better allies?
Make use of the resources you have. As an ally, you can make use of the opportunities you have to amplify the voices of that of the LGBTQ plus community, and raise awareness of the issues that they still face. And you can find out more information about that just by going online.
So in actually, they've collected a lot of resources right there at May17.org. You can go there and pull up all different kinds of statistics and things. We've gone through many different statistics in the past, and we've talked about those things a lot. But if you're looking for resources, it's a great place to go. What about number 3?
Number 3, take action. Show your support and be an ally of the LGBTQ plus community. This could involve sharing, like sharing the illustrations that Raya just talked about.
Right, just like we use that for this specific podcast, you can go on Facebook and you can say, and the nice thing is they have tools and resources right there. So you can go in, you can pick the one that makes the most sense for you. Some of them talk about remembering those that have suffered violence because of being LGBTQ plus. Others talk about advocating for healthcare, and there's 6 different themes there. You can go through and read each one and choose the theme that resonates with you the most, and go ahead and post that on Facebook, go ahead and post that on Twitter, go ahead and post that on those other things that you kids are into these days. I don't know, Instagram. I'm not on Instagram because it freaks me out, but whatever else people are on these days.
You can speak out against discrimination. That's one of the things you could do. You can provide safe and inclusive space for people simply by listening or supporting them. That's another important thing. And you can do this with, of course, with friends and colleagues. They may or may not know where you're at, but if you do it in a loving way.
I had a friend who made a really important observation about this term that we use as safe spaces. And there's a lot of people that will go and say, make fun of this whole idea of, oh, you just need a safe space. But the idea here is when you are living in a society that is constantly putting you down, constantly rejecting you, constantly making fun of you, when you can go to a place where you just don't have to explain yourself and you don't have to explain what it's like, why pronouns matter. You don't have to explain why it's important not to ask what your name was before you transition. You don't have to explain why it's important not to assume that somebody's spouse is going to be the opposite gender. Those kinds of things. You come to a space where people recognize who you are, and all of a sudden it feels like, oh, I don't have to do all of that emotional heavy lifting that I have to do all the time. Can be really, really refreshing.
I'm sure you're just going to ask, so what else could you do?
What would be number 4?
Well, you could attend an event. May 17th, there are going to be a lot of events going on, especially in the bigger cities. And if there is one in your area, if you attend, that's certainly going to help to support. And you'll be part of the solidarity of that group. And that certainly will make a difference. Consider volunteering. You can volunteer your time or your skills to help these organizations achieve their goals.
There's an event that's going on. We're looking at just 2 days from now. If you're listening on Monday, just give a call to your local Pride Center or LGBTQIA plus center and say, hey, do you have an event going on? Is there any way that I can help? Always looking for volunteers, somebody to give out coffee, or somebody to greet people at the door, or somebody to clean up afterwards, or somebody to do all of the work. Anybody that's ever organized an event, there is lots of things to do all the time.
Well, I should have known that. I'm going to suggest that this should really be a February 17th celebration rather than May 17th, because the way you could help is show up at my house February 17th and bring a snow shovel.
That would really be good. There's always opportunities. So let's go on. What is the next one? The next way that we can be better allies during this time?
They, of course, are looking for funds that can help to print materials and do things like that. So find an organization that you'd like to support and donate some money. That's another way you can do it. It's a simple, easy thing to do. If you can't do anything else.
That's a great way to do it. And you can go to May17.org and donate directly to them, or you can find another organization. I know there's a lot of local organizations, and if you can support locally, is always going to be your best bet. But if you're not sure where to go, I would say go to the PFLAG website, and you can always give there. They're doing a lot of really, really good work through PFLAG.
Yes, they certainly are. The last thing I think is probably the biggest takeaway, and that is commit yourself beyond May 17th. You could say, oh, May 17th, I did this, great. Now I'm set for another year. No. Remember, being an ally is an ongoing process. It's not it's not a one-day thing. And we see that in a lot of other things as well, which I won't go into, but that's pretty common. People will be very dedicated during one day for something, and beyond that, it's kind of lost. And if you really want to do something, go beyond May 17th. Be part of it. Educate yourself. Engage in meaningful ways, and get involved with communities around the world.
One of the biggest things that changes people's minds is not when you hear somebody like me who's in the community talking, but when you see the cisgender, heterosexual people speaking up and saying, hey, I am an ally. I support. I give my support in speaking up and being visible. And so things like you're doing here, Dad, that you are starting a podcast with me, and we're doing this and we're talking about this because you know how important it was in our own relationship, and we wanted to bring that to others. Well, maybe the way as you're listening, maybe the way that you be an ally is not to go and start a podcast, though if you did, we would be very supportive and we would love to hear about it. But maybe just post something on Facebook and say, hey, just letting you know, I want to show my solidarity.
Yeah.
Or you make a public statement.
The acceptance is growing exponentially.
And every time you speak up, that helps to solidify that. And we are so grateful when you do.
So if you got any thoughts about that, or if you decide you're going to speak out on the 17th, and that has been something you did, write us and tell us about it. We'd like to hear. Tell us about something you did on the 17th, and we'd be happy to share that with the audience.
You can email TranDescendant@gmail.com is where we get all of our email. We would love to hear your stories. If you have any questions or any topics that you'd like to see us addressing in the future, that's also great. We are always all ears for whatever you have to let us know.
Yes, and we hope to be here for years.
We're very grateful for your support. Thank you for tuning in to listen to all of our dumb dad jokes. And that's not just unique to Dad. I tell my share as well. Yeah. And so does my daughter. She said, you pass that on to me and I will tell those for years and years to come. So we thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.